You are listening to HOA Clapback. She used a clipboard like a warrant. I work as a security guard, and I know what real enforcement looks like. This is your last chance to be reasonable. That was Brenda Klein, the security vendor point of contact for Sunset Ridge Community Association in Tucson, Arizona, standing 3 feet from my face in the parking garage and pointing at a cut zip tie on a storage cage door. She was screaming that I had broken in and stolen packages. My gate access and parking rights were about to vanish if I did not fix this fast. I stared at the cage. The zip tie was sliced clean through. I had never touched it. I said, "I did not do that." Brenda held up a key control clipboard in a clear sleeve and said, "I am authorized to enforce this." She tapped the clipboard like it was a warrant. I asked to see what was on it. She pulled it back and said I was not allowed to read internal security logs. I told her I wanted a copy of the rule that said I could not use my own storage space. She stepped closer and said demanding documentation would result in fines for harassment of staff. That was the trigger. I pulled out my phone to record. She immediately threatened that if I did not remove my camera, enforcement action would follow. I said, "What enforcement?" She smiled and said, "We can tow first and explain later." That was 15 minutes ago. Now I was standing in the management office lobby trying to figure out how a cut zip tie had turned into a full-blown theft accusation. Brenda had already called ahead. The receptionist looked at me like I was a criminal. Brenda arrived 2 minutes later. She walked in carrying a portable printer in one hand and the key control clipboard in the other. She set the printer on the counter, plugged it into a wall outlet, and printed a notice on the spot. She handed it to me. It said I was under investigation for theft from cars in the neighborhood, and that I had been seen checking door handles. The notice also claimed I was running a side business from my home, which violated the covenants. I said, "I do not run a business. I work as a security guard." Brenda said that was exactly what someone running a side business would say. She pulled out her phone and read my license plate number out loud while staring at me. Then she called a tow vendor. I heard her say, "Unit 14B, silver sedan, plate number Romeo Zulu 7493. I need it off the property within the hour." I said, "You cannot tow my car without proof." She said the portal never received my appeal, even though I had submitted it 2 days earlier with a confirmation email. I pulled up the email on my phone and showed the receptionist. The receptionist looked uncomfortable and said she would check. Brenda cut in and said appeals were processed in the order received, and mine was not in the system. The tow yard closed at 6. It was already 4:30. If they took my car, I could not recover it until tomorrow, and I would miss my shift. I asked the receptionist if I could see the portal log. She said management policy did not allow tenants to photograph records. That was the side complication. No photos meant no proof of submission. I left the office and went back to my condo. I needed to think. Brenda had stacked 3 threats in 10 minutes. TOW, theft investigation, side business violation. Each one carried a fine or a suspension. My gate fob and parking pass were tied to my lease, and if the HOA revoked them, I would be stuck outside my own building. I sat down and opened my laptop. I went into my email and found the appeal confirmation. The timestamp was clear. I had submitted it at 9:14 in the morning, 2 days ago. I took a screenshot. Then I logged into the HOA portal and checked my account. The appeal was listed as pending. I took another screenshot. Next, I pulled up my doorbell camera app. I scrolled back 3 days. At 2:15 in the afternoon, my camera caught Brenda standing outside my door holding a shopping bag. She looked around, set the bag down, and walked away. 10 minutes later, she came back, picked up the bag, and left again. The bag looked heavier when she picked it up. I rewound the footage and watched it again. She was not delivering anything. She was taking something. I checked my package log. A portable speaker had been marked as delivered that morning. It never showed up. The tracking said it was left at my door. The doorbell camera showed Brenda taking the bag. I saved the clip and sent it to my phone. Then I checked the next day. At 11 in the morning, Brenda was back. This time she was holding a clipboard and taking photos of my door. She zoomed in on the number plate and the doormat. Then she walked over to the storage cage area and took more photos. One of the photos showed the cut zip tie. I had never been near that cage. My storage unit was on the other side of the garage. I checked my gate fob log from the management portal. I had not swiped into the garage between 6 in the evening and 7 the next morning on the day the zip tie was cut. The log was clear. I took another screenshot. Now I had 3 pieces of evidence: the doorbell clip, the portal log, and the gate fob log. I needed more. I went downstairs and walked to the mailbox cluster. My mail carrier was just finishing her route. Her name was Jessica, and she had been delivering to Sunset Ridge for 5 years. I asked her if she had seen anything unusual near the storage cages recently. Jessica said, "You mean the woman with the clipboard?" I said yes. She said Brenda had been snooping around the cages 2 days ago and had opened one of them with a key. Jessica said it looked strange because Brenda kept looking around like she was worried about being seen. I asked if she would be willing to make a statement. Jessica said she would. I went back to my condo and started building a timeline. Brenda had taken my speaker on day 1. She had framed me with the storage cage on day 2. She had called the tow company on day 3. Every step was designed to make me look guilty and force me out before I could fight back. I needed to move fast. The tow truck would arrive soon. I called the tow company and asked if they had authorization paperwork on file. The dispatcher said Brenda had called it in and that was enough. I asked for a supervisor. The dispatcher put me on hold. While I waited, I checked the HOA covenant documents. Section 12 covered vendor relationships. It said the board could authorize towing only after written notice and a cure period of 72 hours. I had received the printed notice less than 2 hours ago. The tow was illegal. The supervisor came on the line. I explained the covenant rule. He said he would need to see the documentation. I said I would bring it to the yard in person. He said the truck was already on the way. I asked him to call it back. He said he would try. I grabbed my evidence binder and ran to the parking garage. The tow truck was already there. The driver was hooking up my car. I ran over and said, "Stop. You do not have authorization." The driver said he had a work order from Brenda Klein. I said the work order violated the covenant and I could prove it. Brenda appeared from behind a concrete pillar. She was holding the key control clipboard and smiling. She said, "I am authorized to enforce this." The driver looked at her, then at me. I pulled out my phone and showed him the covenant section. He read it and said he needed to call his supervisor. Brenda said the covenant did not apply to security enforcement. I said security enforcement still required board authorization. She said she had verbal authorization from the president. I asked for the president's name and phone number. She refused. The driver got off the phone. He said his supervisor told him to unhook the car and leave. Brenda started yelling. She said the driver was interfering with HOA business. The driver said he was not getting involved in a dispute without proper paperwork. He unhooked my car and drove away. Brenda turned to me and said this was not over. She said I had 48 hours to remove all items from my storage unit or face additional fines. I said I wanted that in writing. She said she did not need to put anything in writing. Then she walked away. I went back to my condo and checked the portal again. A new notice had been posted. It said my storage privileges were suspended pending investigation. The cure requirement was now different. Instead of removing items, I had to provide proof of ownership for every item in the unit. That was the goalpost move. I had complied by stopping the tow, and she had changed the rules. I called the management office and asked to speak to the property manager. The receptionist said the manager was out until Monday. It was Thursday. I asked if there was an assistant manager. She said no. I asked if I could leave a message. She said yes. I left a message asking for a meeting to dispute the suspension. Then I went back to my email and found the original appeal confirmation. I compared the timestamp to the notice Brenda had printed. The notice claimed I had failed to respond within 72 hours. The timestamp proved I had responded within 24 hours. I saved both documents to my evidence binder. Next, I checked the HOA meeting minutes. The last board meeting was 2 weeks ago. I opened the PDF and searched for any mention of storage enforcement or theft investigations. There was nothing. I searched for Brenda's name. She was listed as a vendor contact, but not as a board member. That meant she had no authority to suspend my access without board approval. I took a screenshot of the minutes and added it to my binder. Now I had 5 pieces of evidence: doorbell clip, portal log, gate fob log, covenant violation, and meeting minutes. I needed one more thing. I needed to catch Brenda in the act. I set up a motion-activated camera in the hallway outside my door. Then I set up another camera pointing at my storage unit. Both cameras uploaded to the cloud in real time. If Brenda came back, I would have proof. The next morning, I checked the footage. At 6:30, Brenda had walked past my door and stopped to look at the camera. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the camera. Then she walked to the storage area and opened a different cage. She pulled out a plastic bin and carried it to her car. I downloaded the clip and added it to my binder. The bin did not belong to her. I checked the cage number. It was registered to a neighbor 2 units down. I knocked on their door. A man in his 60s answered. I introduced myself and asked if he was missing anything from his storage unit. He said he was. A set of tools and a small electronics kit. He said he had reported it to Brenda 2 days ago, and she told him it was probably stolen by someone running a side business in the building. I showed him the clip. He stared at the screen and said, "That is her." I asked if he would be willing to file a police report. He said yes. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said an officer would be out within 2 hours. I thanked her and went back to my condo to wait. While I waited, I got a text from the property manager. She said she had reviewed my message and wanted to meet on Monday morning. I replied and said I needed an emergency meeting today because my access was suspended and I had evidence of theft. She replied and said she could meet at 2 in the afternoon. At 1, the officer arrived. I showed him the footage in the timeline. He took notes and said he would need to speak to Brenda and the neighbor. I gave him the neighbor's unit number. He knocked on the neighbor's door and took a statement. Then he asked for Brenda's contact information. I gave him the management office number. The officer called Brenda. She answered and said she was on site. He asked her to meet him in the parking garage. She said she was busy. He said it was regarding a theft investigation, and he needed to speak with her immediately. She agreed. 10 minutes later, Brenda arrived. She was carrying the key control clipboard and wearing her whistle. The officer asked her about the bin. She said she had relocated it for safety reasons. He asked why she had not informed the owner. She said she had sent an email. He asked to see the email. She said she did not have access to her account on her phone. The officer asked if she had authorization to enter storage units. She said she was the security vendor point of contact and had master access. He asked if the board had authorized her to relocate items without notice. She said verbal authorization was standard practice. He asked for the name of the person who gave her authorization. She said the president. He asked for the president's contact information. She refused. The officer said he would need to file a report and follow up with the board. He took Brenda's information and told her not to enter any storage units without written authorization. She said, "I am authorized to enforce this." The officer said that was not his question. He asked again if she had written authorization. She did not answer. The officer left. Brenda turned to me and said I had just made a huge mistake. She said filing a false police report was a felony. I said I did not file a false report. I filed a theft report with video evidence. She said the video was edited. I said it was time-stamped and uploaded to the cloud in real time. She walked away. At 2, I met with the property manager in the office lobby. Her name was Diane. She was in her 50s and looked tired. I sat down and handed her the evidence binder. She opened it and started reading. I walked her through the timeline. Doorbell clip, portal log, gate fob log, covenant violation, meeting minutes, and the bin footage. Diane looked at the doorbell clip and said, "This is Brenda." I said yes. She said she took your package. I said yes. She closed the binder and said she needed to speak to the board. I said the board did not meet until next month. She said she would call an emergency meeting. I asked when. She said Monday. I said, "My access is suspended, and I have a shift tonight. I need my gate fob to work." Diane said she would override the suspension immediately. She pulled up the portal on her computer and restored my access. Then she said she would speak to Brenda and put her on notice that any further enforcement actions required board approval in writing. I asked if she could also review the appeal I had submitted. She pulled it up and said it was marked as received 2 days ago. I said Brenda claimed it was never received. Diane said that was incorrect. She said the portal log showed my appeal was submitted and pending review. I asked for a printout. She printed a gate fob log printout and handed it to me. I added the printout to my binder and left the office. I went to the mailbox cluster and found Jessica finishing her route again. I told her about the meeting and the police report. She said she was glad I had followed up. Then she said, "You should know Brenda tried to get me to contradict you yesterday." I asked what she meant. Jessica said Brenda had stopped her and asked if she had ever seen me near the storage cages. Jessica said no. Brenda asked if she was sure. Jessica said she was sure and walked away. That was the public shame attempt. Brenda had tried to pressure my ally into lying. Jessica said Brenda had also asked if she had seen me loading boxes into my car. Jessica said she had not. Brenda said that was convenient. Jessica said it was the truth and ended the conversation. I thanked Jessica and went back to my condo. I checked my camera footage again. At 4, Brenda had returned to the hallway and stood outside my door for 2 minutes. She did not knock. She just stared at the camera. Then she walked to the storage area and took more photos. One of the photos was a close-up of the lock on my unit. Another photo showed a stash bin in a restricted area. I saved the photos and added them to my binder. The stash bin was identical to the one Brenda had taken to her car. I checked the cage number on the photo metadata. It was the same cage she had opened before. The bin was still missing. On Monday, I went to the emergency board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse at 7. I arrived early and set up my evidence binder on the table. The board president walked in at 7:10. His name was Roger. He was in his 70s and looked annoyed. He said, "This better be good." I walked him through the timeline again. He listened and took notes. When I got to the bin footage, he stopped me and said, "Brenda moved a bin without authorization?" I said yes. He asked to see the footage. I played it on my phone. He watched it twice and said, "This is a problem." Brenda arrived at 7:20. She walked in carrying the key control clipboard and sat down across from me. Roger said, "We need to talk about the storage situation." Brenda said, "The situation is under control." Roger said, "I just watched footage of you removing items from a unit without authorization." Brenda said she had verbal authorization. Roger said, "From who?" Brenda said, "From you." Roger said, "I never authorized that." Brenda said, "You told me to handle security issues as I saw fit." Roger said, "Handling security does not mean relocating personal property without notice." Brenda said the items were evidence in a theft investigation. Roger said, "What theft investigation?" Brenda pointed at me and said, "He is running a side business and stealing packages." I handed Roger the doorbell clip on my phone. He watched it and said, "This shows you taking a package from his door." Brenda said, "I was relocating it for safekeeping." Roger said, "You relocated it to your car?" Brenda said she was securing evidence. Roger said, "Did you file a police report?" Brenda said she did not need to because the HOA handled internal enforcement. Roger closed my binder and said, "This is not internal enforcement. This is theft." He turned to Brenda and said, "You are suspended as the vendor point of contact effective immediately. All future communications will be in writing and copied to the board. You are not authorized to enter any units, suspend any access, or issue any notices without board approval." Brenda said, "I am authorized to enforce this." Roger said, "No, you are not." He stood up and said the meeting was over. Brenda grabbed her clipboard and tried to take my binder. I pulled it back. She grabbed it again. I took a photo with my phone. The flash went off in her face. Roger said, "Brenda, let go of the binder." She let go and walked out. Roger turned to me and said, "I am sorry this happened. The board will issue a formal apology and refund any fees tied to the false accusation." He also said Brenda would be required to return the stolen items in front of witnesses, and a police incident number would be filed. The next day, Diane called me and said the board had reviewed the evidence and determined that Brenda had violated multiple policies. She said the vendor contract was being terminated and Brenda was banned from the property. She also said the board was issuing an insurance risk warning that made the HOA panic because the liability exposure was massive. 2 days later, the neighbor called me and said Brenda had returned his tools and electronics. He said she dropped them off without a word and left. He also said the police had opened a case and assigned an incident number. I asked if he was pressing charges. He said he was considering it. I went back to the management office and asked Diane for a copy of the portal audit log. She printed it and handed it to me. The log showed every action Brenda had taken over the past month. She had suspended 3 other residents, issued 6 false notices, and relocated items from 4 storage units. Every action was unauthorized. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA nightmare stories. Diane said the board was conducting a full audit and would be contacting every affected resident. She also said the board was reviewing the vendor selection process to prevent this from happening again. I thanked her and left. A week later, I got a letter from the HOA attorney. It said the association was settling with me for the cost of the stolen speaker, the refund of fees tied to the false accusation, and compensation for the access suspension. The letter also said Brenda was required to communicate only in writing going forward with the board and was permanently banned from the property. I ran into Roger at the mailbox cluster. He said, "I wanted to thank you for bringing this to our attention. If you had not documented everything, we never would have caught her." I said, "I work security. Documentation is what I do." He laughed and said, "We need more residents like you." I went back to my condo and checked the hallway camera one last time. Brenda had not been back. The storage area was quiet. My gate fob worked. My car was still in its spot. I opened the evidence binder and looked at the timeline. Every piece of evidence had been critical. The doorbell clip, the portal log, the gate fob log, the covenant violation, the meeting minutes, the bin footage, the gate fob log printout, the photo of the stash bin in the restricted area, and the final binder grab photo. Without any one of them, the case would have fallen apart. I thought about the moment Brenda had said, "We can tow first and explain later." That line had come back to bite her hard. The tow truck driver had refused to take my car without proper paperwork. The officer had refused to accept her verbal authorization excuse. The board had refused to let her enforce anything without written approval. Every time she tried to skip documentation, it cost her credibility. The funniest moment came a week later when I ran into the receptionist at the coffee shop near the office. She said, "You know what Brenda said when she came in to clean out her desk?" I said no. The receptionist said, "She walked up to the counter and said, 'I am authorized to enforce this.'" I looked at her and said, "No, you are not." She just stood there and walked out. I laughed and said, "That is perfect." The receptionist said, "I have been waiting to say that for months." She used that line on everyone. It felt good to use it on her. I finished my coffee and walked back to my condo. The sun was setting over the desert. The parking garage was quiet. I swiped my gate fob and the barrier lifted. I parked in my spot and walked to my unit. The hallway camera blinked green. The storage cage lock was intact. Everything was exactly as it should be. I sat down and opened my laptop. I logged into the HOA portal and checked the bulletin board. There was a new post from Roger. It said the board had completed the audit and identified 12 unauthorized actions by the former vendor. It also said the board was implementing new oversight procedures and would be reviewing all vendor contracts. The post ended with an apology to affected residents and a reminder that documentation was required for all enforcement actions. I closed the laptop and looked at the evidence binder on my desk. It had saved me from losing my car, my access, and my reputation. I thought about what would have happened if I had not recorded the confrontation, saved the doorbell clip, checked the portal log, or set up the hallway cameras. Brenda would have won. She would have framed me, stolen my stuff, and moved on to the next victim. But I had documented everything. I had stayed calm. I had followed the rules, and I had won. The key ring count did not match what Brenda had claimed in her clipboard logs. When Roger checked the master key log against the gate fob log printout, the discrepancy was obvious. Brenda had claimed 6 master keys were checked out. The log showed 8. She had been using the extra keys to enter units without logging them. That was the twist that changed everything. When Roger confronted her with the count mismatch, she tried to claim the log was wrong. He pulled out the physical key cabinet and counted the keys in front of her. 2 were missing. She said someone else must have taken them. He said the cabinet was locked and only she had access. She said the lock was broken. He said the lock was fine and he had just tested it. She walked out without another word. The police followed up 2 weeks later. The officer called me and said Brenda had been charged with theft and trespassing. He said the evidence was overwhelming and she had agreed to a plea deal. The deal required her to pay restitution to all affected residents and stay away from Sunset Ridge permanently. I thanked him and said I was glad it was resolved. I never saw Brenda again. The new security vendor was professional and followed the rules. The board sent out a memo saying all enforcement actions would require written authorization and a 72-hour cure period. The memo also said residents had the right to appeal any notice and request documentation at any time. It was everything I had asked for in the first place. I thought about the whole ordeal and realized how close I had come to losing everything over a lie. Brenda had been stealing for months. She had framed residents, manipulated records, and intimidated anyone who questioned her. The HOA had given her too much power and no oversight. It had taken a stack of evidence and a police report to stop her. The lesson was simple. Document everything. Record confrontations, save emails, check logs, take screenshots, set up cameras, build a timeline, bring witnesses. Stay calm, follow the rules, and never let anyone tell you that asking for documentation is harassment. It is your right. And it might be the only thing that saves you. I looked at the evidence binder one more time. It was thick with printouts, screenshots, and notes. Every page represented a moment when I could have given up. Every piece of evidence represented a choice to fight back. And every choice had led to this moment. Justice, accountability, and a quiet parking garage where my car sat safely in its spot. Until next time, keep your receipts.